Introducing the next Attorney General of South Carolina, Martel.
Thank you so much. This is a great crowd here tonight in Cornelius. I love this town, it's beautiful. You don't have to, this isn't a mandate, but if you want to, stand up and stretch a little bit and look to your neighbor and tell your neighbor that they're essential. Everybody just kind of stand up.
You're essential. You're essential. Hello, I remember
That was a good video.
Griffin.
And now that we've gotten to know our neighbors, not only are you essential, but each one of you in this room is worthy, loved, important, and created in the image of God. The fact that you're created in the image of God gives you similar power to what Jesus had. You have the Holy Spirit in each one of you, which will give you the power to stand up against tyranny and to stand up when injustice is occurring. It will be a conviction that will come from deep within you, and you will know individually, because your relationship is an individual one. You have inalienable rights that were discussed earlier today, and those are so foundational. Those are the only things protected that allow us to be free. Our religious freedom that is protected under the First Amendment has been eviscerated.
Right.
And I go so far as to take what Don and what Ed and what Chris has said, that we have ideas and we know what's going on and we're identifying problems. We need to get better at that, at identifying the real problems. There are a lot of illusions on the wall. And I know from personal experience, I've chased after things that were distractions and made mistakes, but I've learned. I've voted for Republicans that I regret, but it was the lesser of two evils. We need to be done with that. Not only does Desiree need to run and everybody needs to help her vote. When's the primary here in North Carolina? Does anybody know that? Okay. So you need to figure that out, and then you need to rally around, get voter drives, and get everybody out to vote for Desiree. But I encourage not just Desiree to run. Did we hear about the mayors that are up there in DC powwowing against the people?
Yeah.
At the local level, each one of you is equipped to do something.
Yeah.
I think that everyone in this room should run for either school board or mayor or coroner. That's got a lot of power, believe it or not. That's a lurking position that has a lot of power. What else could you run for here? City council. Find out, a lot of these things are going to be filing dates in March. So do your research and file and blow them all away. We don't even need to fight them if you replace them.
Yes.
Voter integrity is an issue, and we all need to continue to work on that, and that's an important issue. But we're here to talk about medical freedom today. And I'm in the trenches, and I'll tell you that even with the Supreme Court orders, the people of the state of South Carolina that I see and that I help and try to work with are seriously still suffering right now in real time. We are fully occupied, I would submit to you, by the communist fascist regime, which has infiltrated us through our administrative state. The administrative state covers hospital administration, educational administration, think of another administration, it's all of our court administration. I'm gonna tell you a fun story about court administration today, and I hope it inspires you. Just all of the different, and think of all the different administration that's what people are relying on in private business. This is why we have to give you the shot, because it's HR policy, or we're following this policy through our administration. I submit to you that based on what I know and information from trusted sources and whistleblowers, that this vaccine is not a vaccine. Ed wrote one of the best briefs I've ever read for one of our federal cases, And it talks about what is a vaccine, which came out in the early 1900s defining the smallpox, which except for a few cases when people took the vaccine, they would no longer ever get smallpox, and it eradicated it. More people are in the hospitals now who have had vaccines, as many as it not.
Yep.
Once people get into the hospitals, it's almost a hostage situation to get out. That's been my experience.
That's right.
I'm going to tell you a story about masks, and then we'll get back into vaccines. And there's like almost three parts of this. There's masks, there's testing, there's the manipulation, the hospital protocol, exemptions, and then what you can do to be best prepared. That's what I'm going to speak about and answer any questions that you may have too. When the masks first came out, my husband and I were like, whoa, if you cannot fight this, we're not going to be able to fight the rest of it, right? So we'd go to these mask meetings, and I just happened to download the ordinance, right? Because that's what lawyers do. And so I read the exemptions, and buried in many of the ordinances around town, and probably even in North Carolina, were medical, religious exemptions and all these things. That night that we had a meeting, a police officer came to our meeting and said, I understand you're all in here not wearing masks, and this is an anti-mask meeting. And we said, yes, but I showed him the ordinance. He went outside. I literally thought it was a joke, right? Because in America, I was like, okay, this guy's just dressed like a police officer, and he's gonna do a dance or something for our, group. No. He was serious. So I gave him the ordinance, and he went away. And he said, that's fine, you can peaceably assemble. That's one of our rights, right? So my husband and I, when the whole government was shut down in South Carolina, said, let's drive to Columbia and we'll protest on the State House steps. And many people joined us there. And as we drove, DHEC signs, which we pay our taxpayer dollar, go home, stay home, go home, stay home. It was really a fear-based thing, and this is in 2020.
Yeah.
So here we are in 2022, and this is my mask story from court today. I was in the Beaufort County Family Court for an uncontested divorce, which I will also say that the downfall of our society has been the family court.
Yep.
And I've been in there, and it's awful, and someday I'll write a book about it, but it has destroyed our nuclear family, and the family court is more of a nanny state situation. If you can at all costs, stay out of that, and keep your children out of that. People are fighting over giving their children vaccines now in family court. It's really ugly. So I went to court. It was just gonna be really quick before I drove up here. And I never usually wear a mask in court, but I don't know if any of you guys have felt the escalation of mask police sort of situation. But they give me one sometimes, but I just don't put it on. I'm the only one, and it's a little bit scary. But all the other attorneys are like, we're masked up, we're double vaxxed. Even talking through the mask in court. And remember, during this whole time, think about how justice got totally destroyed. No jury trials for like a year and a half because people couldn't get together. Delayed justice, people's rights put on hold, virtual hearings where you didn't really get to do the full testimony that you wanted to do. So they were having a criminal trial upstairs too. So normally the little bailiffs know me and they don't really say anything more. But this particular guy was like very intimidating, very tall, and had a really black mask on, and just looked really like Washington D.C. police, the guy, you know what I mean? And he had his gun and everything, and he came walking up, and I knew he was gonna walk up to me because I was just sitting there waiting, but maskless. And he said, you have to wear a mask. And I said, no, I don't. And he said, yes, you do. There's a rule in courthouses that you have to wear a mask. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, I've got my 12-year-old niece with me. Am I gonna make a stink? And I said, well, I have an exception to, and there are exceptions, just like similar to the ordinances. The Supreme Court, which is very liberal in the state of South Carolina, has put out some crazy orders, back and forth, arbitrary all the way through this. But most of them have been expired at this point. So he said, oh, you have an exemption? Like, I'm gonna tell him. And I said, I'm not comfortable talking about my personal, medical reasons or religious reasons with you. And then I shook his hand and I said, I'm Lauren Martel. And he did not force me to wear a mask, but he did still continued to intimidate a little bit until he loosened up. And he said, "You're an officer of the court, so like be careful. You know what the rules are, right?" Let me tell you something. As an officer of the court, my duty is to the Constitution of the United States and South Carolina. That's the oath I took. Can I tell you I was a little bit scared? I think my niece knew I was a little bit scared too. But that's where we have to take the ideas and what we know to be true and then act on them, even if we're scared. And I submit that as you continue to do that, you won't be operating in fear anymore.
That's right. That's right.
I don't think the cavalry is going to come over the hill. I don't think Supreme Courts are going to do the right thing. I don't think there's any one great case that's going to make this all better. I think we are the cavalry.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's exciting. God gave us breath and hope. That's what South Carolina is. As long as I breathe, I hope. And we are supposed to breathe freely. So some of my cases, I can go on and on about masks. I help a couple of mothers who, shopping in Target, were, assaulted by Livability in Charleston, which is an unconstitutional enforcement arm of the city council. And we would send cease and desist letters. A lot of times, lawyers' cease and desist letters are all it takes. So if you can find a good conservative lawyer here in North Carolina, you can ask for just letters first before full-blown litigation. The next serious cases, and this is where I know we're at war, and I feel like who would think a low country lawyer who just does, basic, normal cases would all of a sudden be in situations where I felt like I was taking hostages out of hospitals. I've watched countless people die because family members were not as prepared as they could be and didn't even wrap their head around the fact that the hospital administration was the enemy. There were good people, good doctors, good nurses, but their hands are tied because of the administration.
That's right.
And it's brutal when you see people go on this protocol in the hospitals, which is a financial incentive to push remdesivir, watch people's kidneys and livers and other organs sort of fail, and they build up with fluids. And then the next step is the ventilator. I've been told that the billing for that can run between $75,000, but if somebody dies, is on a ventilator for a long time, up to $400,000. Meanwhile, we have whistleblower information that ivermectin is being suppressed.
Yeah.
And other very reasonably priced life-saving medications that, if given early enough, would have probably saved so many lives.
Murder.
What are some of the things that you can do for yourselves and your family to be prepared about this? One, in every case, I always had to ask if there was a power of attorney. Because when somebody in the hospital is isolated and they don't have somebody to advocate for them, and they become unable to advocate for themselves or too weak, it's always best to have a good medical power of attorney. And nowadays, I always say that you can even be specific with that and say, I don't want remdesivir, I don't want a ventilator, like very clear. And have those hard conversations in advance. I say stay out of hospitals if you possibly can. There are plenty of sources now, and people are learning about how to get ivermectin and the FLCCA protocol, or whatever protocol you want to get. It's a symphony of supplements and megatoses of vitamins and certain things that are put together. Usually people need an antibiotic. I'm not a doctor, I'm just a lawyer. The reason why I'm not a doctor is because I did not do well in science. So maybe that's why I'm not paying attention to the science. But a lot of times people go in with an underlying bacterial infection too that's not getting treated, and then it turns into that pneumonia. So be aware of those signs. Get to know your local doctors. Find a conservative doctor here that will help you and treat you. Because if, God forbid, you do find yourself in a COVID ward, isolated, the 2 cases that I have had success with, we did have a doctor who was willing to go in and administer ivermectin and prescribe it. So the patient had a prescription for it prior to going into the hospital. Does that make sense? So, and I also say know your hospitals too. It's worthy to just go down and find out what their positions are. So then you won't be caught, I call it flat-footed in tennis, if you don't know which way the ball is gonna go and you're just there. You don't wanna be caught flat-footed in these hospitals. You wanna be aware of what their protocols are, and then maybe even ask for them in writing, in advance. One of my friends passed away in August, and we didn't get a litigation before he ended up passing away, but that was when I first realized the horror of this. And it did take this case to help me understand how bad it was, because I was dealing with the other lawyer on the other side, and this is Presley Stutz. Maybe some of you may know him.
Yes.
He was a real patriot, and his family signed something that I could talk about these things because it was such a public interest situation. But the lawyer for the hospital that he was in literally challenged me to find another hospital in South Carolina that would give him a different protocol than what they had done. And he was on a ventilator at that point. Because we were thinking if we could move him and we could get some ivermectin. I have had one patient that was on a ventilator for weeks, almost 3 weeks. We had a doctor who went in and crunched up the ivermectin, gave it to him intravenously. He can communicate with his family now. He's still in recovery, he's still critical, but he would have died without the ivermectin. So we wrote letters there, but that was how blasé the attorneys and the people in the hospital are. But there are some good people, and so what we have to do is encourage the good people to have the strength to rise up and to say no. Because at this point, it is, with what we know, it is murder. It is a crime.
Yes.
And when good people do nothing, it's just gonna continue on. So I encourage you to get activated. In that other case that I told you where the gentleman was on a ventilator and we had a doctor who went into the hospital and gave him ivermectin, we had to file like a complaint for a declaratory judgment. It actually had 75 other pages of exhibits on it. A lot of them were the protocols and things like that. But in South Carolina, you do need to have that doctor's prescription and that doctor's willingness. And in this particular case, the doctor had hospital rights. So that's important to know. This case, I was honored to have Ralph Larego's law firm out of New York, Buffalo, New York. He's probably the leading attorney in fighting these cases, going into all their states. He comes in pro hoc vici, and he gets, he's trying to save people one person at a time. And just like Ed said, sometimes you're gonna win, sometimes you're gonna lose some. But the success stories where people were on death's door and about to die, and then we were helpful for them, the hands and feet of Jesus, right? And that's what we're called to. And again, in Matthew 28, the Great Commission, it says that we're supposed to lay hands on the sick. And this is something that this COVID tyranny has just tried to do away with all of our religious freedoms and what we want. So my encouragement to you is just to stay the course, run the race, and just get involved. Don't think, because judges aren't better than we are.
That's right.
Our politicians aren't better than we are. Big pharma isn't better. Corporatism isn't better. The people who are reaping the monetary temporal benefits of corporatism, they're not better. But we as Christians, sometimes we think, and I pray a lot, so I do, but sometimes God wants us to act with discernment.
Yes.
That's right.
And I think it's going to take a political movement as well as any legal case. And it's going to take educating our next generations. And we identify so many of the problems, but I sit here and I think, it's still our turn. As long as we're alive, we can't say, the next generation's going to have to figure this out. As long as we have breath, it's up to us to do something. So I thank you so much for having me tonight, and I'll look forward to answering questions. God bless. My website is martelforag.com.
Yes.